the galaxy's deadliest beast first part, had been running freight deliveries to the outer rim for 3 years, but he'd never seen a planet quite like Prime. The red sun cast everything in an eerie crimson glow, and the landscape looked like something out of a nightmare. Jagged black rocks jutted up from crimson sand, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with heat waves that had nothing to do with temperature. His cargo ship, the Lucky Strike, touched down at the designated coordinates with a soft hiss of landing thrusters. Checked his manifest one more time. Medical supplies for the research station, nothing fancy. The pay was good, though, suspiciously good for such a simple run. That should have been his first warning. "Control, this is freight hauler Lucky Strike requesting permission to begin unloading," spoke into his comm unit as he powered down the engines. Static crackled back at him for several long seconds before a tired voice responded. "Lucky Strike, this is research station. Permission granted, but make it quick, pilot. We're tracking some unusual seismic activity in your area." Frowned, seismic activity hadn't been mentioned in the job briefing. He grabbed his sidearm from the weapons locker, more out of habit than any real concern, and made his way to the cargo bay. The medical supplies were packed in standard containment units, each one about the size of a small refrigerator, easy enough to handle with the cargo loader. He hit the bay door's control, and they opened with a mechanical whine. The air that rushed in was surprisingly cool, despite the hellish appearance of the landscape. Activated the cargo loader and began moving the first container toward the exit ramp. That's when he heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the kind of sound that made every primitive instinct in his human brain scream danger. Froze, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. The growling stopped. Waited for a full minute, listening to nothing but the gentle hum of his ship systems and the distant wind across the alien landscape. Maybe he'd imagined it. 3 years of solo runs could play tricks on a man's mind. He shook his head and continued with the unloading. The second container was halfway down the ramp when the ground started shaking. Not the gentle tremor of seismic activity, but something else entirely. Something rhythmic, like footsteps. Very large footsteps. Looked up from the cargo loader just in time to see something that made his blood freeze. Rising over a nearby ridge was a creature that description. It was massive, easily 30 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be made of living shadow and starlight. 6 powerful legs carried its bulk with surprising grace, and its head was a nightmare fusion of reptilian features and something that might have been angelic if not for the rows of teeth that gleamed like obsidian daggers. But it was the eyes that truly terrified him. They were intelligent, not just animal cunning but real intelligence, and they were looking directly at him. Straining kicked in. He dropped behind the cargo container and drew his sidearm, knowing full well that the small plasma pistol would be about as effective as throwing pebbles at a battleship. The creature's eyes tracked his movement with predatory precision. "Control, this is Lucky Strike," he whispered into his comm unit. "I've got a problem down here, big problem." "What kind of problem, Lucky Strike?" "The kind with teeth," replied, watching as the creature began to descend the ridge with fluid, deadly grace. "Lots of teeth." Static filled the comm for a moment before the voice returned, notably more tense. "Lucky Strike, you need to get out of there now. That's a void stalker. The research station is tracking 3 of them in your area." What now?" "Apex predator. They hunt in the space between dimensions. Nothing we've thrown at them even slows them down. Every military unit we've sent after them has been completely destroyed." Felt his mouth go dry. "You sent me to a planet with unkillable monsters and didn't think to mention it." "The briefing said the area was cleared. Look, we can discuss this later if you survive. Right now you need to get to your ship and get off planet." The Void Stalker had reached the bottom of the ridge and was now moving across the flat ground toward his ship. Each step shook the earth beneath his feet. He looked back at his cargo bay, then at the creature approaching. No way he could make it to the cockpit in time. That's when something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It was perhaps 50 feet away from the ship now, close enough that could see the way light seemed to bend around its form, close enough to smell something like ozone and burnt metal. But it had stopped moving. Instead, it was sniffing the air. Pressed himself against the cargo container and tried to think. What could possibly interest a dimension-hopping apex predator about a cargo ship full of medical supplies? The answer came to him with horrible clarity. The medical supplies weren't just standard medications. According to his manifest, one of the containers held experimental nutrition supplements. Supplements designed for deep space exploration, packed with concentrated proteins and nutrients that didn't exist naturally anywhere in known space. The creature was smelling food. As if to confirm his worst fears, the Void Stalker turned its massive head toward the cargo bay and made a sound that was almost like a whimper. Not the terrifying growl from before, but something that sounded almost plaintive. Had grown up on a farm before he became a freight hauler. He'd raised animals, fed them, cared for them. He knew that sound. It was the sound of hunger. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered to himself. The creature took another step forward, and could see that despite its terrifying appearance, it was thin. Not starving exactly, but lean in a way that suggested it had been having trouble finding food. Its movements, while still graceful, had the careful economy of an animal conserving energy. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, made a decision that would change his life forever. He stood up. The Void Stalker's head snapped toward him immediately, those intelligent eyes locking onto his with laser focus. Raised his hands slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Easy there, big guy," he said in the same tone he'd once used to calm spooked livestock. "You're hungry, aren't you?" The creature tilted its massive head, and could swear he saw curiosity in those alien features. Moving very slowly, reached for his cargo manifest scanner and called up the inventory of the nutrition supplements. The container was right behind him, sealed but not locked. Standard cargo protocols. "I've got food," he said to the creature, though he felt ridiculous talking to what was supposedly the galaxy's deadliest predator. "Good food, but you're going to have to let me get it for you." The Void Stalker made that whimpering sound again, and to some amazement, it sat back on its haunches like an enormous dog waiting for dinner. Couldn't help but laugh, though it came out a bit hysterical. "Well, I'll be damned." He turned to the cargo container and began working on the seals. The nutrition supplements were packed in individual portions, each one about the size of a dinner plate, and concentrated enough to sustain a human for a full day. For a creature the size of the Void Stalker, it would probably be more like a snack. The seals disengaged with a soft hiss and lifted out one of the supplement packs. It was a dense, brownish brick that smelled vaguely of beef and vegetables. He turned back to the creature and held it up. "This what you're after?" The Void Stalker's eyes fixed on the supplement pack with unmistakable hunger. It leaned forward slightly, but didn't move from its sitting position. Took a careful step forward, then another. The creature remained perfectly still, watching his every movement. When he was about 10 feet away, gently tossed the supplement pack onto the ground between them. What happened next was both fascinating and terrifying. The Void Stalker's form seemed to shift and blur for a moment, and suddenly there were what looked like tentacles of living shadow extending from its body. The tentacles wrapped around the supplement pack and drew it back toward the creature's mouth. There was a wet crunching sound, and the supplement pack was gone. The creature looked at expectantly. "Oh, you want more?" Couldn't believe he was having this conversation. "Hold on." He went back to the container and retrieved several more supplement packs. The creature waited patiently as he tossed them over one by one, each one disappearing into that nightmare mouth with the same shadowy tentacle technique. After the fifth pack, the Void Stalker made a sound that could only describe as satisfied. It was a deep, rumbling purr that he felt more than heard. The creature's posture had relaxed considerably, and those terrifying eyes now looked almost friendly. "Lucky Strike, what's your status?" The voice from his comm unit nearly made jump out of his skin. Control, I'm feeding the monster." "You're what?" "It was hungry. I gave it some of the nutrition supplements. It seems pretty happy about it." There was a long pause before the voice returned, significantly higher pitched. "You fed a Void Stalker, and it didn't kill you." "Apparently not. It's just sitting there now, looking at me like I'm its new best friend." Was joking, but as he looked at the massive creature, he realized there was some truth to it. The Void Stalker was watching him with what could only be described as friendly interest. Its massive tail, which hadn't noticed before because it had been lashing dangerously, was now still. "Lucky Strike, you need to finish your delivery and get out of there. Even if that one is temporarily docile, there are 2 more in the area." That got moving. He quickly unloaded the rest of the medical supplies, stacking them in the designated area about 100 yards from his ship. The Void Stalker watched the entire process with apparent fascination, its head turning to track his movements like a cat watching a mouse. When finished and headed back toward his ship, the creature stood up and began following him. "Oh, come on," muttered. "You can't be serious." The Void Stalker followed him all the way to the bottom of the loading ramp, then sat down again and looked at him expectantly. "You can't come with me," told it firmly. "You're the size of a building. You wouldn't fit in my cargo bay, and even if you did, I don't have enough food for you." The creature made that whimpering sound again. Looked at it for a long moment, taking in the alien intelligence in those eyes, the way it had waited patiently while he worked, the fact that it could have killed him at any moment but had chosen not to. On impulse, he reached into his personal supply kit and pulled out one of his own meal rations. "Here," he said, tossing it to the creature. "This is all I can spare right now." The Void Stalker caught the ration with one of its shadow tentacles and consumed it immediately. Then it made that satisfied purring sound again and settled down next to the ship like an enormous guard dog. "Lucky Strike, you need to take off now. Our sensors are picking up the other two stalkers heading your way." Looked at the creature one more time. It was watching him with what he could swear was fondness and something that might have been hope. "I'm sorry," he told it. "I have to go." He turned and headed up the ramp into his ship. As he powered up the engines, he could see the Void Stalker through the cockpit window, still sitting patiently beside the landing area. The Lucky Strike lifted off with a roar of thrusters and looked down to see the creature watching his departure. Just before he activated the jump drive to leave the system, he could have sworn he saw the Void Stalker raise one massive paw in what looked like a wave. Shook his head as the stars streaked past his viewports. In 3 years of freight hauling, he'd seen a lot of strange things, but he'd never made friends with a monster before. As Prime faded behind him, found himself thinking about those intelligent eyes and that plaintive whimper. The creature had been hungry, alone, and despite its fearsome reputation, it had shown remarkable restraint and even something like gratitude. He wondered if he'd ever see it again. 3 days later, as he was delivering a load of mining equipment to station, got his answer. He was in the middle of unloading when he heard a familiar sound that made his blood freeze. The low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Looked up from his cargo loader to see a familiar, massive shape emerging from behind the station's main building. The Void Stalker from Prime was sitting patiently about 50 yards away, watching him with those intelligent eyes. "Control, this is Freight Hauler Lucky Strike," said into his comm, though he couldn't keep the amazement out of his voice. "I think I've got a visitor, the galaxy's deadliest beast second part." The panic that erupted at station was immediate and overwhelming. Emergency klaxons began blaring within seconds of transmission, and he could see personnel running in every direction through the station's viewports. The mining platform's defense systems powered up with mechanical precision, targeting arrays swiveling to lock onto the Void Stalker. "All personnel to emergency stations," the station commander's voice boomed over the public address system. "We have a confirmed Void Stalker sighting. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations. Military response teams deploy immediately." Watched in growing horror as plasma cannon turrets emerged from hidden compartments around the station perimeter. The Void Stalker, still sitting calmly near the main building, seemed oblivious to the weapons now aimed at its massive form. "Control, hold your fire," shouted into his comm. "It's not hostile." "Lucky Strike, get clear of the target area immediately. We're authorizing lethal force." "You don't understand. This is the same creature from Prime. It followed me here somehow. It's not attacking anyone." "Void Stalkers don't follow cargo haulers, pilot. Clear the area now." Looked at his new companion through the cockpit window. The creature was watching the defensive preparations with what appeared to be mild curiosity, its head tilting as plasma cannons powered up with rising whines. It made no aggressive moves, showed no signs of preparing to attack. If anything, it looked confused by all the commotion. "I'm going out there," announced. "Negative, Lucky Strike. Stay in your ship." Was already moving toward the airlock. He grabbed his personal supply kit on the way, checking to make sure he had several meal rations inside. If food had worked before, maybe it would work again. The airlock cycled open and stepped onto station's landing platform. The air here was thin but breathable, recycled through the station's atmospheric processors. He could feel the vibrations from the Void Stalker's massive heartbeat through the metal deck plating. "Easy there," called out as he approached, holding up one of the meal rations. "Remember me." The creature's massive head turned toward him and saw unmistakable recognition in those alien eyes. The Void Stalker made that soft, purring sound he remembered, and its posture relaxed visibly. Was still 20 feet away when something unexpected happened. The creature began to shimmer and blur, its form becoming indistinct around the edges. For a moment, thought it was preparing to phase into another dimension, but instead, something amazing occurred. The Void Stalker was shrinking. The massive 30-foot form compressed and condensed, shadow and starlight swirling together as the creature reduced itself to a more manageable size. When the transformation finished, the Void Stalker was about the size of a large horse, though it retained all of its otherworldly characteristics. "Well, I'll be damned," breathed. "You can do that." The creature made a pleased rumbling sound and padded toward him on legs that still shook the deck plating, but no longer threatened to bring down buildings. It stopped just in front of and lowered its massive head toward the meal ration in his hands. "Lucky strike, what's happening down there?" The station commander's voice crackled through his comm unit. "It shrunk," replied, still staring in amazement. "And it's being friendly. I don't think it wants to hurt anyone." The Void Stalker gently took the meal ration from his hands using one of those shadow tentacles, consuming it in a single bite. Then it did something that made his heart skip a beat. The creature nuzzled his shoulder with its massive head, like an enormous cat seeking affection. "Lucky strike, you're saying this Void Stalker is domesticated." "I don't know about domesticated, but it's definitely friendly. Look, can you call off the defense systems? You're making it nervous." Could see that this was true. The creature's ears, which he now realized could flatten against its head, were doing exactly that as the plasma cannons continued to track its movements. Its tail, previously still and relaxed, had begun to twitch with agitation. There was a long pause before the station commander replied. "Stand down defensive systems. Maintain targeting lock, but do not fire without direct authorization." The whine of charging weapons gradually died away, and the Void Stalker's posture improved immediately. It settled down next to like an enormous dog and made that satisfied purring sound. "This is unprecedented," came a new voice over the comm. "This is Dr. Sarah. I've been studying Void Stalker behavior for 5 years, and I've never seen anything like this. They're supposed to be completely solitary creatures that show no social behavior whatsoever." Looked down at the creature, currently using his leg as a pillow, and smiled. Maybe they just needed the right kind of social interaction. "I need to study this creature immediately. Can you bring it to Research Bay 7? "I don't think it's going anywhere without me," replied. "And I've got a cargo delivery to finish." "The cargo can wait. This is a scientific breakthrough of enormous proportions. A peaceful Void Stalker could change everything we know about these creatures." Looked down at his new companion, who was watching the conversation with obvious intelligence. "What do you think? Want to meet some scientists?" The creature tilted its head and made a questioning sound that somehow interpreted as curiosity. "All right, Doctor, we'll come to your research bay, but I'm staying with it. Something tells me it won't cooperate if I'm not around." The next several hours were among the strangest of life. Research Bay 7 turned out to be a massive chamber designed for studying large specimens, with transparent aluminum walls and more scientific equipment than had ever seen in one place. Doctor was a small, energetic woman who seemed completely fearless as she approached the Void Stalker with various scanning devices. "Remarkable," she murmured as she took readings. "Its cellular structure is unlike anything in our databases. The creature appears to exist partially in normal space and partially in what we call fold space, the dimension between dimensions." The Void Stalker submitted to the examination with patient grace, though noticed it kept one eye on him at all times. Whenever he moved away from the creature's immediate vicinity, it would make that whimpering sound until he returned. "The bonding behavior is extraordinary," Doctor continued. "Void Stalkers have never shown attachment to any living creature before. They hunt alone, they travel alone, they exist in complete isolation. But this one has clearly formed a strong social bond with you specifically." Why me? Asked. I just fed it some nutrition supplements. It's more than that. Look at the way it positions itself in relation to you. Classic protective behavior. It's treating you as part of its pack, even though void stalkers don't form packs. As if to prove her point, the creature shifted its massive bulk to place itself between and the research bay entrance, when a group of station security personnel appeared in the doorway. They're just curious, told his companion, gently placing a hand on its flank. Nobody's going to hurt anyone here. The creature relaxed slightly, but remained watchful. Doctor's scans revealed more surprises. The creature is definitely female, and she's quite young by void stalker standards, probably only 50 or 60 years old. Only 50 years old? Stared at the massive creature in amazement. Void stalkers can live for thousands of years. In human terms, she's barely more than a child. That might explain the unprecedented behavior. Young creatures are more adaptable, more likely to form social bonds. So I've basically adopted an alien puppy that happens to be the size of a small building. That's not entirely inaccurate. The research session was interrupted when the station's proximity alarms began blaring. Through the research bay's viewports, could see several small ships approaching at high speed. Military vessels, by the look of them. This is Admiral Harrison of the Galactic Defense Force, came a stern voice over the communication system. We're here to eliminate the void stalker threat. All station personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance immediately. Felt his blood run cold. Doctor, can you contact them? Explain that she's not dangerous. The scientist was already working at a communications console. Admiral Harrison, this is Doctor at station. The void stalker is not aggressive. It's displaying unprecedented peaceful behavior. Doctor, void stalkers have destroyed 17 military installations in the past year alone. There are no peaceful void stalkers. We're here to eliminate the threat. The creature beside had gone very still. She was listening to the conversation and could see intelligence working behind those alien eyes. She understood that she was in danger. Admiral, with respect, you're making a mistake. This creature has had multiple opportunities to attack civilians and has chosen not to. She's formed a social bond with a human freight hauler. Impossible. Void stalkers don't form social bonds. Stepped up to the communication panel. Admiral Harrison, this is pilot of the Lucky Strike. The creature followed me here from Prime. She's been completely peaceful the entire time. Pilot, you're either lying or deluded. Void stalkers are dimension-hopping apex predators. They don't follow cargo haulers like lost pets. That's when the void stalker did something that surprised everyone. She rose to her feet and approached the communications console, gently nudging aside with her massive head. Then she made a series of complex sounds, varying in pitch and tone in a way that suggested deliberate communication. Admiral, Doctor said quietly, I think she's trying to talk to you. There was a long pause before the Admiral replied, his voice noticeably less certain. That's not possible. The creature made the sounds again, and this time thought he could hear something almost like words in the alien vocalizations. She was definitely trying to communicate. Admiral, we need more time to study this. What we're seeing here could change our entire understanding of void stalker intelligence and behavior. I have my orders, Doctor. These creatures are classified as an extinction-level threat to all galactic civilization. Based on the behavior of other individuals, not this one. Sir, she's trying to communicate with you. Doesn't that suggest we should at least attempt diplomatic contact before resorting to violence? Watched the military ships maneuvering outside the viewports and made a decision. He placed his hand on the void stalker's flank and looked into her intelligent eyes. If they try to hurt you, what can you do? He asked. The creature's form began to shimmer again, but instead of shrinking, she was expanding. Her body grew translucent, becoming harder to focus on, and could feel the hair on his arms standing up as local gravity fluctuated around her. She's preparing to phase shift, Doctor said in amazement. She can escape into fold space if necessary. Admiral called into the comm. She can disappear if she wants to. The fact that she's staying here should tell you something about her intentions. It tells me she's planning an ambush. Felt frustration building in his chest. Sir, with all due respect, if she wanted to kill everyone on this station, we'd already be dead. She had hours to do it while we were studying her. The creature beside him made a soft sound and gently touched his shoulder with one of her shadow tentacles. When he looked at her, she gestured toward the viewports with her massive head, then looked back at him with unmistakable concern. I know, told her. They want to hurt you, but I'm not going to let that happen. Pilot, came the Admiral's voice. You need to move away from that creature immediately. We're beginning our attack run. Like hell you are, snapped. This creature is under my protection. You don't have the authority to. Then I'm making it official, interrupted. According to galactic maritime law, any creature that chooses to accompany a registered freight hauler is considered part of that hauler's crew and is entitled to the same protections. I'm registering her as my ship's mascot and official companion. There was dead silence on the comm channel. Doctor looked at with wide eyes. That's actually a legitimate legal precedent. There have been several cases of alien creatures joining ship crews. Admiral continued, if you attack her now, you'll be attacking a member of my crew. That makes it an act of aggression against a civilian vessel. The pause stretched on for nearly a minute before Admiral Harrison replied, his voice tight with frustration. This is highly irregular, pilot. But legal, replied firmly. We'll be monitoring the situation closely. If that creature shows any signs of aggressive behavior. She won't, said, looking at his companion who was watching the conversation with obvious relief. Will you? The Void Stalker made that soft purring sound and gently nuzzled his shoulder again. The galaxy's deadliest beast third part. The modifications to the Lucky Strike took 3 weeks and cost most of his savings, but they were necessary. His new crew member needed space, and the standard cargo bay wasn't designed for a shape-shifting creature. The station engineers had to install specialized environmental controls, reinforce the deck plating, and create what amounted to a luxury apartment for a 30-foot alien. Had decided to call her Stella, partly because of the way starlight seemed to move through her translucent body, and partly because she seemed to like it when he said the name. She would make that pleased purring sound whenever he addressed her directly. The dimensional anchor system is online, Chief Engineer reported as he finished the final installation. This should prevent her from accidentally phasing part of your ship into fold space during emotional moments. Emotional moments? Asked. Doctor's research showed that young Void Stalkers have less control over their dimensional abilities when they're excited or stressed. Without the anchors, she could theoretically phase your cargo bay into another dimension and leave you with a very large hole in your ship. Looked through the reinforced viewport into Stella's new living space. She was currently in her smaller form, about the size of a large horse, examining the new accommodations with obvious curiosity. When she saw him watching, she bounded over to the viewport like an enormous puppy and pressed her face against the transparent aluminum. She likes it, said with a smile. She's remarkable, agreed. I've been an engineer for 20 years, and I've never worked on anything quite like this. The way she can manipulate local gravity and dimensional space is beyond anything in our textbooks. Over the past 3 weeks, had learned a great deal about his new companion. She was incredibly intelligent, capable of understanding complex instructions and even learning to recognize written symbols. Doctor had established that Void Stalkers possessed cognitive abilities comparable to humans, though their thought processes were fundamentally alien. Stella had also proven to be useful in ways hadn't expected. Her ability to phase shift allowed her to detect problems with the ship's systems that normal sensors couldn't find. She had already identified a dangerous stress fracture in the hull that could have led to catastrophic failure during jump drive activation. But perhaps most importantly, she was loyal. Absolutely, unquestionably loyal. Had tested this accidentally when a drunk miner at station had gotten aggressive during a disagreement about cargo loading procedures. Stella had materialized behind the man in her full 30-foot form and made a sound that could only be described as a polite but unmistakable threat. The miner had sobered up instantly and apologized profusely. "Mister," came a voice over the ship's intercom, "you have an incoming transmission from Galactic Freight Coordination." Made his way to the bridge, where the communication system was displaying an official GFC seal. These calls were never good news. "Pilot of the Lucky Strike, this is Director from GFC headquarters. We need to discuss your recent acquisition." "What about her?" asked, settling into his pilot's chair. "Reports indicate you're traveling with an unregistered alien creature, of significant size and undocumented capabilities. This is causing considerable concern among our insurance carriers. Sighed, he'd been expecting this call. Director, Stella is registered as a crew member under Galactic Maritime Law. All the paperwork has been filed properly. Mr. The creature in question is classified as a void stalker, which are considered an extinction-level threat by the Galactic Defense Force. No insurance company in the galaxy will cover a ship carrying such a creature. Then I guess I'll have to operate without insurance. There was a pause before Director continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. Mister, I'm afraid it's not that simple. GFC regulations require all freight haulers to carry minimum insurance coverage. Without insurance, we'll have to revoke your operating license. Felt his stomach drop. Without his license, he couldn't operate as a freight hauler. It was the only job he'd ever known, the only life he'd ever wanted. How long do I have? He asked quietly. 30 days to either secure insurance coverage or remove the creature from your vessel. I'm sorry, mister, but those are the regulations. The transmission ended, leaving staring at the blank screen. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of the reinforced door opening as Stella entered the bridge in her smaller form. She had apparently sensed his distress through whatever mysterious connection existed between them. Hey, girl, said as she approached, and gently rested her massive head against his shoulder. Looks like we've got a problem. Stella made a questioning sound and found himself explaining the situation to her as if she were human. She listened with obvious intelligence, her head tilting at key points in the conversation. They want me to get rid of you, he concluded. But I'm not going to do that. We'll figure something else out. Stella made a sound that had learned to interpret as gratitude and nuzzled his shoulder affectionately. Then she did something unexpected. She moved to the navigation console and began manipulating the holographic display with her shadow tentacles. What are you doing? Asked, watching in fascination as she called up star charts and shipping routes. Stella highlighted a series of systems along the outer rim, then looked at expectantly. You want to go there? Studied the routes she had selected. They were all in unregulated space, beyond the jurisdiction of the GFC and most galactic governments. That's pirate territory, Stella, dangerous for ships traveling alone. Stella made a sound that had learned meant amusement, and her form shimmered slightly. For just a moment, she allowed her shape to become more predatory, reminding him that she was, despite her friendly nature, still one of the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. Good point, admitted. I don't think pirates would be much of a problem with you around. The next few days were spent researching opportunities in unregulated space. It turned out there were plenty of people willing to pay good money for freight services, no questions asked. The profit margins were higher than legitimate shipping, though the risks were correspondingly greater. Was reviewing a particularly lucrative offer to transport agricultural equipment to the Vega Syndicate when his proximity alarms began sounding. He checked the sensors and felt his blood run cold. 3 ships were approaching at high speed, military configuration but flying under pirate flags. Stella called, "We've got company." She appeared on the bridge almost instantly, having phased through the ship's bulkheads rather than using the doors. Her form was already shifting toward her larger, more intimidating configuration. "Attention cargo vessel," came a rough voice over the communications system. "This is Captain Vex of the Crimson Fang. Prepare to be boarded. Surrender your cargo and nobody gets hurt." Looked at Stella, who was now in her full 30-foot form and looking decidedly unhappy about the interruption. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Should we surrender?" Stella's response was to phase shift partially into fold space, becoming a terrifying shadow-wreathed apparition that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The temperature on the bridge dropped noticeably and could see frost forming on the viewports. "I'll take that as a no," said with a grin. He activated the external camera system and opened a communication channel to the pirate ships. "Captain Vex, this is of the Lucky Strike. I'm afraid I can't surrender my cargo. My crew member wouldn't like it very much." "Your crew member? Listen, pilot, I don't care how many security guards you've got. My ships carry enough firepower to." Interrupted by switching the external cameras to show Stella in her full horror, shadow tentacles writhing around her massive form, as she stared directly into the camera with eyes that seemed to burn with alien intelligence. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. "Is that," came Captain Vex's voice, notably higher-pitched now, "is that a Void Stalker?" "Her name is Stella," replied cheerfully, "and she's very protective of our cargo." "Nobody said anything about a Void Stalker. We're just simple pirates. We don't mess with extinction-level predators." Watched on his sensors as the three pirate ships rapidly changed course and accelerated away from the Lucky Strike at maximum speed. "Well, that was easy," he said to Stella, who was already returning to her smaller, friendlier form. She made that pleased purring sound and settled down next to his pilot's chair like an enormous cat. Over the following weeks, word spread quickly through the pirate networks about the freight hauler with a Void Stalker crew member. The Lucky Strike became known as the ship that was absolutely not to be messed with under any circumstances. Paradoxically, this reputation made S job easier rather than harder. Legitimate businesses in unregulated space were desperate for reliable transportation that couldn't be hijacked by pirates. The Lucky Strike's unique security arrangement made them the most sought-after freight service in the Outer Rim. Found himself earning more money in a month than he'd made in the previous 6 months of regulated shipping. The clients didn't care that his crew member was technically a monster. They only cared that their cargo arrived safely. It was during a routine delivery to New Titan Colony that first learned about Stella's true capabilities. The colony was under attack when they arrived. A raiding fleet of heavily armed pirates had overwhelmed the local defenses and was in the process of looting the settlement. Could see explosions on the surface and smoke rising from burning buildings. "We can't get involved," told Stella as they watched the attack from orbit. "This isn't our fight." Stella watched the destruction below with growing agitation. Her form was shifting and flickering as emotional distress affected her dimensional stability. "I know you want to help," continued, "but we're just a freight hauler. We can't take on an entire pirate fleet." That's when Stella did something that changed its understanding of what she truly was. She moved to the navigation console and began inputting coordinates with rapid, precise movements of her shadow tentacles. "What are you planning?" asked nervously. Stella looked at him with those intelligent eyes and made a series of complex sounds that had learned to recognize as her attempt at human speech. She was getting better at it, and this time he could almost understand what she was trying to say. "Help them," he interpreted. Stella nodded, a gesture she had learned from watching humans. Looked down at the colony where people were dying while pirates looted their homes and businesses. He thought about the children down there, the families hiding in basements while armed raiders kicked down their doors. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this smart, no unnecessary risks." What happened next was unlike anything in recorded military history. The Lucky Strike approached the pirate fleet broadcasting standard surrender protocols, appearing to be just another victim for the raiders to rob. The pirates took the bait, 3 ships moving to intercept the apparently helpless freighter. That's when Stella phased through the hull of the Lucky Strike and appeared in open space, her form expanding to its full 30-foot glory as she manipulated local space-time around herself. Watched in amazement as his companion demonstrated abilities that no scientist had ever documented. She could exist in vacuum without protection, move through space by manipulating gravitational fields, and most remarkably, she could phase entire pirate ships partially into fold space, effectively disabling them without destroying them. Within 10 minutes, the entire pirate fleet was neutralized, their ships floating dead in space with crews that were alive but completely helpless as their vessels flickered in and out of normal reality. "Stella," said over the comm as she phased back into the ship, "you're absolutely terrifying when you want to be." She made that pleased purring sound and nuzzled against him affectionately, as if disabling a dozen warships was just another way of playing fetch. The grateful colonists paid and Stella enough to outfit their ship with military-grade equipment and hire a small crew of human assistants. Word of the incident spread quickly through both legitimate and criminal channels. The Lucky Strike was no longer just another freight hauler. They had become something new entirely, a combination cargo service, security company, and force for justice in the lawless regions of space. realized that losing his original license might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. He had found his true calling, and he had found it with the most unlikely partner imaginable. As they prepared to leave New Titan Colony with a cargo hold full of gratitude payments and a new contract to protect merchant convoys, looked at Stella and smiled. "You know what, girl? I think we're going to do just fine out here." Stella made that happy purring sound and settled down for the journey ahead, already planning their next adventure in her alien mind.